Good morning, Nigerians. It's my pleasure to welcome you yet to the continuation of your current affairs program, TMI, coming to you live from our network studios right here in Lagos on ITV Networks. My name is Joshua Okata. Today on the show, we will be looking at the suspension called by the federal government led by Bola Ahmed Tinubu on Rivers State, and of course with special bias to reactions and counter-reactions from the presidency, and of course the criticism made by former president in the person of Goodluck Ebele Jonathan, and of course the Nobel laureate Wole Soyinka. I won't be doing this alone, as I'm being joined today by my guest in the person of Mr. Dakpo Adaramewa. He is a policy and governance consultant. Good morning, Mr. Dakpo, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So, our discussion today is centered on a two-way traffic. First, the suspension, or as they call it, the state of emergency pronounced on Rivers State, and of course the aftermath of the particular pronouncement. Now, it's barely a week after the suspension was called. And of course, we've gotten reactions and counter-reactions, especially from intellectuals, from the MBA, from civil society group, and of course, the labor organization. What is your thought as regards this? Because everyone seems to be towing the same line, which is condemning that pronouncement made by President Bola Ahmed Tinubu.
There's reason to it. And I think it's interesting that we keep calling it anything other than a coup, right?
Say that again.
A coup against the sitting governor, right? That is usurping his authority, right? Now, the question of does the Constitution allow for that is a very big question, and ultimately, above the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria is always going to be the laws of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. No matter what the President wants to do, he has to subject himself to the laws of the Federal Republic. Currently, the provisions of the Constitution, to a layman's reading, does not seem to give him that authority, but ultimately the power to decipher that rests in the hands of the Supreme Court. So, pending when the Supreme Court actually gives a full and final ruling as to whether or not it is constitutional, the thing we can ask ourselves is it even justified? Does the remedy meet the problem? Does it match? Because the president has presented himself primarily as somebody who believes in federalism, right? He has sought to establish the third tier of government by ensuring that's the local government, ensuring they get funding, to so-called, quote-unquote, liberate them from the government. He has sought to reform the tax system to ensure that, again, we're giving more autonomy to states, right? And then take an action like this for one person to go against the will of all the people of Rivers State. Somebody that was not even an electorate. He did not vote in the Rivers State elections. He played no role in determining who their governor is. But yet, with one swoop of the pen, has effectively said, regardless of what you say and what you want as a people, in terms of the ruling of your state, this is what I want, right?
All right, now let's look at the section of the law. We're going into the law book. If you say it was actually a coup, the president relied on section 305 of the 1999 Constitution as amended, which states that in a situation of national danger, disaster and terrorist attack, in which a government suspends normal constitutional procedure to regain control. Before long, we've seen the back and forth. We've seen the explosion, the vandalization of pipeline, and all of that. Could that be a reason for the president to wade in this case by virtue of making that pronouncement? Does that make it a coup?
I think it's interesting that we expect the state governor, using what apparatus is he supposed to control who is vandalizing what? As a governor, he neither controls the police, nor does he direct the army. He's not in charge of enforcing security for his state, although he is, quote unquote, the main person in charge of security, but he has no tools to do that. The federal government is in charge of securing those things. The president commands the military and can direct the police, right? It's all within the federal system, right? So to ask him to step aside so the president can do what is already in his power to do is, it's a big question of why. And does this meet the merit of a national emergency? I remember a few years ago, not too long ago, when we were dealing with MEND and a few of all these other agitations, they cut Nigeria's oil production down to the barest minimum. I don't remember a state of emergency being declared in order to enable the president of the time to deal with those things. I believe they dealt with it while still maintaining the office of the governor, right? So why is this any different? If there are miscreants within the system who seem to think they can threaten the whole nation, they should be dealt with. The Nigerian military is far too big, far too powerful to allow a small group of bandits with old AK-47s to tell it what to do. Do you need to remove a sitting governor to be able to enforce the law? And where does this end? If there's conflict in any state, does it mean that immediately we are going to suspend the governor so that the president can handle it himself? And there is the legislator, there is the executive arm. If they are having issues, there are constitutional provisions for them to handle each other. If the legislator wants to remove the governor, there's a provision for that. They can take a vote. Do you understand? There's provisions for them as a state to handle their own internal affairs. And like a lot of other people, I don't understand what exactly has happened for it to get to this level.
All right. In all of this, we are seeing, Nigerians at large are seeing the former president, Goodluck Ebele Jonathan, for the first time coming out brazenly to condemn, as in quote, the sham pronouncement made by President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. In his words, he made so many accusations. He called on the act of the president as being an abuse of power, an abuse of office, an abuse of privilege, an abuse of everything. Aside from that, we're having the like of Nobel laureate Professor Wole Soyinka, who also accused the act of the president as an act that is against federalism. What is your take on all of this?
I think they are just expressing their truest opinions. But the focus, unfortunately, now is solely on the president. Now, he took that decree, but there was one person that could have stopped it. There was one body that could have stopped it, but it did not, right? The House, the legislature decided that rather than putting things to a proper vote, and let us know how our senators voted on this issue, so that we can hold them to account for their decisions. They went simply with an a, nay, this is too delicate an issue. It was the speed at which they rubber stamped it for the president was shocking. It shows that there is no checks and balances as they should, right? There's, if we're allowed to give example of foreign countries, right? We have a president in the USA who seems to be one to do whatever he wants. But the other bodies of government are holding him, they're restraining him. He's not ruling by decree. And so that should have been what the Senate and the House of Reps should have done. They should have stopped things. They should have asked the president to come and appear before it and justify his decision, right? So while we put pressure on the presidency, we should also put pressure on our senators and our House of Rep members that what are you doing, right? You are the ones that are closer to us, right? Why did you allow this thing scale through with little to no opposition? No questioning, no, what's going on?
Now, talking about the issue as alleged, rubber stamp legislature, this pronouncement was made, and of course, an administrator was handed over as a representative of the governor in that state to take lead of the economic activities of that state without having this administrator go through the legislature for screening and approval. Talking about rubber stamps, legislature, what's your take on that?
It's interesting. I think it begs one very dangerous thing that I have noticed that the media has not really caught on to, right? We are setting a very dangerous precedent. We are exposing, if you will, the weakness of our democracy. We are showing people that one decree can appoint a man unelected to be in charge of an entire state. We are planting seeds in the minds of other people that it's still possible in Nigeria. We know what's happening in a few other states in the Sahel region where the military has taken over the whole entire country simply by decree, right? We are planting seeds and showing the world that, our democracy might not be as firm as it is, as we think it is, right? We are meant to be the beacon of democracy in Africa, right? But it's still a very frail thing, right? And the president has set a dangerous precedent by appointing a military man. It was shocking to see military men in uniform on TV in what seems to be a new council that is ruling a state. Those were pictures I saw growing up from the old days. I never thought in my lifetime that we will see that happen again. It's very worrying.
Throwing a state into the hands of a former military man, some are of the opinion that if they were reliable, why not allow them to take precedence when it comes to the governance of the entire nation?
That would be the question that will come to a lot of people's minds at this point. It is feeding into this idea that if the solution to the problem is the military, and that's very dangerous. It sets again a very dangerous precedent. And this democracy of ours is very frail, right? We must hold on to it. And considering everything in Nigeria is going through right now, the president has been making a concerted effort to try and draw in foreign direct investments, to try and send a message to the world that Nigeria is open for business. It's a democracy. We're making decisions that might hurt us in the short run but will help us in the long run. But yet at the same time you make drastic decisions like this that make the whole world ask, I'm sorry, is this what you call a democracy? Is this what you call federalism? Is this how you rule your country? The key word there being rule, not lead. It's a very shocking and worrying trend. And what's going to happen after 6 months? Is it going to go back to normal? Are they going to reinstate Fubara and the legislator, and they will see out the rest of their term? Or is it going to be extended again? How long will it be extended if it is?
Now let's look at the issue of the governor, because he's in the eye of the storm, as it were, because in all of this no one has heard anything from him. It's been barely 6 days. No one has heard any press release. He has not held any press statement. He had not held any press conference. And no one seems to know his whereabouts. Nigerians and the good people of Rivers are saying, if you are alive, Siminalayi Fubara, speak up. What's your take on that?
I believe I heard reports, and I think I saw a video of him attending church yesterday. I hope that is a recent video and not something somebody cooked up and changed the label, right? If that's true, then that's fair, right? And I'm not worried about his safety, but I think he too wants to be very careful. Because
seeing him in a public setting, does that amount to anything? We're talking about making bold statements.
Well, it's a very dicey one for him. And I think he's probably in shock, in all honesty.
Really?
We too would be in shock. If one day you are the elected governor, and then you are sitting at home and you turn on TV and you see that you are no longer the elected governor, he in his right senses will be very careful as to what next statement, because any statement he makes, what's to stop it from being considered treasonous statements? And if it is considered a treasonous statement, what's to stop him from being arrested? All of these seem far-fetched right now, but it also would have seemed far-fetched if 2 weeks ago I told you that somebody would remove him as the governor with a swoop of a pen. So he's being wise in keeping his mouth quiet for now to really understand what his next move should be. Is it to approach the judiciary, which would seem the logical step, and how does he proceed with that? These are very delicate times. And as a man, as he has shown himself to be, somebody who cares about the people of Rivers State, it's wise for him not to stir up the populace so we don't create chaos in the streets, because nobody wins.
We'll be going for a short break, but when we return, we'll be looking at what this kind of pronouncement portends for our democracy, and of course looking at it at an overall view as to how the international community will view Nigeria practicing what we call nascent democracy, and that will be shortly after this time out. Please don't go nowhere. Thank you so much for joining us, and of course, if you're just joining, we are still talking about the aftermath of the suspension made by President Bola Ahmed Tinubu on Rivers State. And of course, we're also looking at it from the angle of the criticism made by former President Goodluck Jonathan and of course Professor Wole Soyinka. Now I have my guest here who has been giving us various perspectives to this, and of course we'll be looking at other areas of the criticism, as you know, from President Jonathan, former President Goodluck Jonathan. And of course I have something I want to share with you, which is part of the criticism that he made, and I want you to react to it. He said in his words, and I quote, "No businessman will bring his money to invest in a country where the judiciary is compromised, where a government functionary can dictate to judges what judgment they should give." What's your take on that?
I think that's fair. I think this is something we have known for a very, very long time. You know, because say for example, I am a businessman in New York. I have $40 million, $50 million that I want to invest. Nigeria is competing with every other part of the world. Think about that for a second. I have $100 million to invest. I will look at Nigeria. I will also weigh up Dubai. I will look at Nigeria. I will also weigh up any other developing country in the world. I will look at Singapore. I will look at the UK. I will weigh all these countries on their pros and cons, their ease of doing business, the political stability, which in young democracies like Nigeria, it matters a whole lot in terms of how secure a person's investment will be. Do you know how much foreign investors in Nigeria lost when the Naira, went down? Do you know how many of them lost? Millions. So when people look at the current state of your democracy, and it would seem that there is no separation of powers, it would seem like the powers that be is ruling by, in many ways, decree. It creates a problem, right? Because investors don't want to come to Nigeria, right? Every year we have different regimes. Let me say every regime we have the president to travel abroad, shake hands and say, yes, we have a memorandum of understanding that $1 billion will be invested in Nigeria's so and so sector. But there's no follow-up. 90% of those memorandum of understandings are non-binding. They're non-binding, and they are based on agreements that the country will fix certain things before they bring their money. Business people are not stupid. They're not going to invest their money in a country where it seems like anything can happen. Now imagine the governor that has been removed now. Imagine some of the contracts that he might have been negotiating with certain businesses, certain payments that needed to have been made. All of a sudden, we've had a situation where there's no transition of power in Rivers State. There's no period in which the things are being handed over properly, like it should do from one regime to another to ensure the smooth flow of governance within the state. What we had is step out, leave the files on the table, and go. And then somebody else has to pick up. Do you know what it means to run a state? Many of us that run small businesses understand how difficult and challenging it can be to run a state in Nigeria. Not to talk about that the administrator will come in on the first day of office and have to try and catch up with all of these things. And how much of the parastatus of governance will still be there? How many of Fubara's ministers will still be allowed to function? How many of his special assistants, all those people with big portfolios, how many of them will still be in government? Those are questions that we've not yet been told, right? So it creates a system of chaos where foreign investors are not, they're not inclined to want to do business. And it sends a very clear message that, you see, this is our democracy of a thing. We're not too sure about it.
So is it safe to say that in Rivers State, we will not be able to see FDI coming anytime soon with such kind of decree, as it were?
It's not just Rivers State, it's the whole of Nigeria. Whatever happens, people are paying attention. Foreign investors are paying attention. It is likely to scare them off. That's all I'm saying. It is very likely to scare them off. Does that mean that, if things were allowed to run the course and it led to, serious, street chaos and further vandalization of, major pipelines, that too will stop people from coming to invest in the country. But it's about balance and proportion. And I think that's where everybody is getting at. Is it balanced? Is it proportionate to the threat? Because there's nobody that would argue that if the alternative was for people to start fighting themselves, ethnic violence across the states, then nobody would argue that, it's not a worse situation, right? But is it proportional? Was it necessary? Is the treatment not too harsh for the problem? And were all parties involved in this problem really spoken to?
When you mean parties, whom are you referring to?
I'm referring, according to anybody with eyes, will see what is happening. Because you watch interviews of the former governor of Rivers State, you see the statements that he makes. You will know that he is playing a role in this. You don't need divine intuition to know that. Just listen to him. Listen to the interview he gave. You will know that he's playing a role in this. For us to ignore that would be childish. Absolutely childish to ignore. So let's actually talk to all the parties that are pulling the strings. I was talking to somebody earlier about what's going on in Rivers, and I said, for the first time, Nigerians are being able to see under the veil. For years and years, we've had leaders who are consumed by personal greed and self-interest to the point that they play with the lives of millions of their citizens over petty squabbles, over you should have done this, you are not loyal, you are this, you are that. Nobody's caring about the loyalty to the people. So for the first time, we've all now seen, because this one is happening in front of everybody. These are battles that should happen in dark rooms, in 2 a.m. meetings, but now they're happening before the national press, right? And it's showing us that nobody really cares about these people. Nobody cares about the development of the state. They are willing to grind an entire state to a halt because of personal issues. Please tell me, why do we need godfathers? There's an election in 2 years. Can we not battle it out then? Why all this?
So, in the eyes of the international community, what's your take as regards this, considering our nascent democracy?
The message to the international community is that there's still a lot for us to work out in our democracy. That our federal structure needs further work. Because I cannot think of many other federal structures that would allow for these kind of actions to be taken. Bear in mind, the country is not at civil war. We're not facing sporadic ethnic violence. So does it really call for this? I believe the state of Nigeria can secure its own pipeline. We spend the most on our military than almost every other West African nation combined on our military, and we cannot secure pipelines. How wide are these pipelines? How long are they? If we put our military men back to back protecting each kilometer of this thing, will we not keep it secure? So, next question, what are we talking about here?
Now, in all of this, we're expecting to see the presidency manage this information in terms of criticism and counter-criticism. But ordinarily, what we get, especially lately from the presidency, is that in reactions to the criticism made by President Goodluck Jonathan, and of course Wole Soyinka, it was viewed as a personal issue. What's your take on that?
Well, they're just trying to protect themselves.
Are they trying to water down very important issues by viewing it as just a personal issue?
Of course. If you are criticizing the way I conduct my life, and my response is to say that it's because I didn't give you biscuits in primary 5, I am taking away from the main substance, right? And that's what's happening. And my hope is that the government of the time, there's no backtracking, the declaration has been made, right? The question is now, how do we manage this crisis to ensure that it does not have lasting impact, not only on the state, on the democracy, and also how the international community, perceives us. And the key way to do that is we need to get through these 6 months as quickly as possible, create a council that brings in all the leaders of the river states, right? All the major influencers, to come together and find a quick solution to this problem, so that in 6 months' time we can have a quick return to democracy And then also, we have a full and final verdict from the Supreme Court as to whether that provision of the Constitution allows for the removal of a duly elected governor of the state alongside his legislator.
Finally, as we go home, what is the faith of the good people of Rivers State? Because they've been put in the balance. Is there going to be a fresh election after 6 months or a reinstatement of the governor? You can address that in less than 1 minute.
The only hope for the Rivers State people is, first, I would suggest they call back their senators and ask them important questions about where were they when this approval was given in the Senate. Let them call back, because nobody can stop them from doing that, right? And then prepare for what happens in the next 6 months. If it is another election, they should go out in mass and vote. And if their governor is coming back, they must stand by him and support him.
Thank you so much, Dakpo, for coming on the show. I really
It's been a
appreciate your
pleasure.
time. I've been speaking with Mr. Dakpo Aderamewa. He is a policy and governance consultant. And of course, that's our offering for you this morning.